So we'll start with classes and object-oriented programming. So just to recap, last week we looked at classes. So a class consists of data and functions that operate on the data. So data is also called attribute of an object, and the functions are also referred to as actions on the attributes. And we saw that Python is a bit different from other languages, that you do not explicitly declare data anywhere, but whenever inside a function you refer to some data as self.data, some self.x, then x becomes a member attribute of that particular object. Okay. And we also saw that Python has certain special names. So in case of modules, we had names like underscore name, and similarly within classes also we have some special functions which really overload certain operators like plus, minus, and there are few other special names like underscore init, which behaves as a constructor. Okay, so if there are any questions, please send them through chat window or raise your hand so that I can unmute you. Okay. So then we started looking at the example of a person's class, and I started with a simple person. So we want to create a person which may or may not be related to a bank. So let's look at the code for person. So can everyone see the screen? On the top I have a Python file, and in the bottom I have Python shell. Okay, so in the person class I have the constructor which creates the person, and this person has a name. Okay, and for the name I am also storing the last name, because later we'll see that the persons can be sorted based on their last names. Okay, so the last name is going to be same as name if the person does not have any two components of the name, but that's kind of irrelevant to the discussion of class. It's the way I am implementing it. And then there are certain get functions which give you back the last name or the full name of a person. And in this case, if you see the init class, I am having a birth date also for the person. Now it may happen that during initialization or during construction, birth date is not passed. So by default I am setting birth date to none. So as I said, this is a good practice to have all object variables as part of init, because that way you will remember that, okay, these are the variables or these are the data objects that I have to initialize. Okay, so set birth date is something where I really set the birth date. And finally there are certain other functions which work on the data in the class. Okay, so any questions on this? Okay, so once we have that, remember that whenever we call sorting in Python, the default sorting, it uses a less than method to order sequences. So now I am defining a less than method for person class, and this less than method is true if self's name is lexicographically less than other's name and false otherwise. So and we are looking at last name followed by the first name. Okay, so if last name are same, then only we are sorting based on the first name or the full name. Okay, so again, it's just my interpretation of less than. You can have some other interpretation based on your requirement. And then we have a str method which will be called whenever we try to print this particular name. Okay, so then I have certain persons like myself, some Garfield, Bruce Wayne, and so on, and then I am setting date of birth for certain persons. And finally I have some test routines which will create a list of persons and then print it before and after sorting it. So you can see that in the test person I have 3 persons in the list, and for each person I am printing it. So printing makes the use of underscore underscore str function, okay, which in turn prints the name of the object. So when I print the names without sorting, you get it in the same order as I put them in the list. But plist.sort sorts them according to their last name. So you can see that list becomes sorted after we have tested the person. So this is the basic person, which has name, birth date, and certain other objects. Person, in this case, if you look at something else, in this case I am passing the word object when I am creating person class. Now this is where inheritance comes into picture. So inheritance is a mechanism to build a hierarchy of types. A type X inherits attributes from any type Y above it in the hierarchy. So in this case I should really show an object at the top as well. So somewhere here I should have the object, which is a Python thing. Okay, so if I have to draw this diagram in Python, I should really create an object class object as well. Okay. So once we have that, I can have the hierarchy, and then inheritance says that anything which is available on top is also available in a class below it or in the object below it. So in Python, the object class is at the top of the hierarchy, and every other class is supposed to inherit from the object directly or indirectly. So why this is important? Because this is how Python can mix types. So since anything is object, so you can create a list of anything, you can create a dictionary of almost anything, and so on. Okay, so this is why you are able to create a dictionary which contains numbers as well as strings as well as user defined objects and so on. Okay, so person in our example inherits directly from the object. Okay, so what about bank person? So now we are saying we have a special type of bank person which is a person but which has certain extra attributes. Okay, so whenever you have this English sentence X is a Y, immediately in inheritance diagram you can think of Y is a subclass of X. Okay, so when we look at bank person, we will see that bank person class has all the properties that a person has, plus there will be certain extra properties. Okay, and when I say bank person inherits from person, it also means it indirectly inherits from object or anything which is in between object and person, which is inherited by person. Okay, so this way you can think of grandchild also inherits from its grandparent. Okay, so in other words we say that bank person is a subclass of a person and person is a superclass of bank person. So when Sridhar is asking, when X is a Y, X is a subclass of Y. That's true. Okay, and Y is a superclass of X. So probably I may have said it incorrectly earlier. Okay, so sorry for that. But X is a Y means X is a subclass of Y and X inherits from Y. So let's look at the code once again. So when we come to bank person, so a bank person is a normal person, so it inherits from the person. Okay. However, it also has certain extra features. So for example, whenever you open an account in bank, you get an account number or an identification number. Okay. So in the initialization class of bank person, you can see that I am calling the initialization of person itself. So if you want to create a bank person with certain name, you actually are having a person with the same name, but at the same time you are having some kind of special ID for that. So here self.id, this is a new member which will be present in every bank person object, but it will not be present in simple person object. Okay. Now how do we keep track of such IDs? Because in a bank, maybe out of 10,000 people, only 100 people will open a bank account. So we should get some kind of sequential IDs from 1 to 100. But how do we remember it? So now this is where class variable comes into picture. Now apart from self.id, I can also refer to something called bankperson.nextID. Okay. So what is this doing? So in this case, bankperson.nextID is what we call a class member, and this is something which should be declared outside all the methods in the class. So if you see here, within bankperson, I am having a class specific variable called nextID, and this is the object, or this is a data value which is shared by all instances of bankperson objects. Okay, if I create 100 objects, if I create 200 objects, all of them will refer to the same next ID, and whenever I create a new account or new person joins the bank, I can increment this next ID. Okay, so this will be available to all the objects. So Sridhar's question is, do we have to worry about multi-threading? Yes, if multiple objects are going to update same class variable, then you have to make sure that you do it in some kind of in a sequential form, or you have to take some kind of lock on the object. Okay, so yes, because next ID it's shared among multiple objects, and it is possible that during multi-threading concurrent programming, multiple objects try to modify the same class variable. It is very important that you take care of critical, you make it some kind of critical section. Okay, and once we have new attributes in bankperson, we can also see that there are some new functions that are added. So in particular, I have added get ID function, which will give me ID of a particular bankperson. Even more important is this less than function. Now within a bank, I really don't care about the name ordering of people. Okay, I would like to sort them according to their bank ID. Okay, so Tejas has a question. Let me just get over that. Okay. So Tejas is asking, can you repeat what is the significance of person init class within this subclass? Okay, so the significance is that person class should get initialized whenever we are calling bank person class. Okay, so in a way, before you can create a bank person, you have to make a person. Okay, so person.init will in some sense create a person, and on top of it you will add some extra attributes which are specific to the bank person. So this is like saying that every bank person is a person first. Okay, now in this case we are really just passing name attribute directly to the person, because we really don't care about anything else in our person class. However, in some other cases we might want to have some other information which can get passed from bank person to person. So for example, it might happen that while creating the bank person object, you always want date of birth to be specified. Okay, in which case init of bank person will also take another argument, date of birth, and then you will have to set the self dot set birth date, I think. Okay, so the init of bank person will do certain things which may or may not be done by the person object itself. And in this case in particular, it will create the person object, set its birth date, and then it will also set the ID that we want. Okay. So yeah, so we were discussing about this less than function. For a bank person, probably bank does not care about name, but what it cares about is the identification number. Okay, because it can happen two customers with same name exist in bank. Okay, and here is something which will come later. So let's look at the testing, which probably I won't be able to run, but I will just try it once again. So what does test bank person do? It creates few more person P1, P2, P3, P4. Okay, and just note that P1 is same as what I called me at the top level. Okay, so the names happen to be the same. However, P1 will be a different person than me because it is a different object. I am once again calling person constructor. If I wanted the same person, I would have called the copy constructor, or the I must have used the same reference. Okay, so in this case I am creating another person. Okay, so I have two persons named Ame Karkare. I have another bank person which is named P Mukherjee, and then I have another bank person which is named Ame Karkare, and finally I have a bank person Vijay M. So all these four are related to bank, and then I can run certain test on it. So I can ask what P2 is, what is the ID of P3, and so on, and I can compare these persons. Okay, so let me just try running interpreter once again. Okay, so okay, so this has worked. Okay, so in fact, so person object has no attribute ID. So somewhere I am calling this thing. So, but let's look at this test case, test once again. Just clean it up a little bit. Okay, so P2 is P Mukherjee. We see that when I try to print a person, it prints its name. Then ID of P3 is 4. So this is the next person that I created. Okay, ID of P4 is 5, and so on. Okay, and then P2 less than P3 is true because P2 must be having an ID of 2 in this case, or 3 in this case. Okay, P4 less than P3 is false, and once again you can see that this is false because P4 has an ID which is greater than P3. Now when I ask P1 less than P3, okay, so in fact now I know what is this problem. So when I ask P1 less than P3, it says this is false. Now look at P1. P1 is Ameya Karkare. P3 is also Ameya Karkare. Okay, and then this says P1 less than P3 is false. Okay, so it might look like that I am trying to compare ID of P1 and P3. Okay, however that is not correct. And the next thing tells you that. So when I ask P4 less than P1, what is your guess? What should happen? On line, the last line, I will just put it here. Okay. So when I try to run P4 less than P1, I get this big exception. Okay. So unfortunately the exception is coming before all other things. That's what confused me. Okay. So when I try to run P4 less than P1, I am getting an exception. And can anyone guess why that is happening? So I will unmute you all. So I have unmuted everyone. Please try to answer this. So this exception is coming when I call P4 less than P1.
I think it's because of different type.
But then just before this line I did P1 less than P3. P3 is also a bank person. P1 is a person, and still I got false. So the issue is when I call P1 less than P3. Okay, so the way these operator overloading works is this really gets translated to less than called on. So this is equivalent to less than called on P1 comma P3. Okay, and this will get replaced as less than P4 comma P1. Okay. Now Python, the way it is, it will again translate it further. It will say P1 dot underscore underscore LT underscore underscore P3. Okay. Or in other words, it just calls, remember, the object on the left becomes self. So these two things are converted by Python to these calls. Okay. Now in the first case, the LT will be always for the first object. Okay. So this is P1 dot underscore underscore LT. So let me keep it like this only. So this is P1 dot underscore underscore LT and this is P4 dot underscore underscore LT. Okay. So now in the first case, I am calling less than operation on P1. P1 happens to be a person class, and which means what I get is this particular less than, where I am comparing the names of the two objects. Okay. But when I call P4 dot less than, in that case I am calling less than from the bank person class. Now in bank person class, other becomes P1 and there is no member ID inside P1. Okay. So this is the problem. And once again, because Python does not do any static type checking, it is able to pass P1 as other object, but then when it tries to search ID inside P1, it crashes. Okay. So once again, it's very important to do type checking yourself before you write such code. When you are mixing the type, it's always a good idea to do some minimal type checking manually. Okay. So any questions up to this? Right. So I can see instructor Acads, which means probably Manish is also online. Or it might be Prasanna, I don't know which of the two this is. Okay. All right. So let's now come back to our slides. Okay. So we were discussing about bank person. Bank person is a subclass and person is a superclass. So just going over what we discussed. So bank person class overrides certain attributes or functions from person class. So in particular, we saw that initialization and less than routines were getting overwritten. Okay. Then bank person also added few new attributes. So in particular, it added a next ID, which is a class attribute. It added an ID attribute, which is object specific attribute, and finally a get ID method, which returns the current ID. Okay. So this is very similar to how we will write an object oriented code or inheritance in any other language like Java or C++. But the thing to remember is any variable which is outside body of the function or which you refer using class name becomes class instance, class member, but the data members which are defined using self become object specific members. Okay. So any questions up to this point? So Sridhar is asking, is calling superclass init a must or is it optional? I think it is optional. By default, the default constructor or init constructor will get called without any argument. Okay. But let's check. I will check it. Okay. So these are the things which don't come to our mind directly, my mind directly, but it's good that you people raise this question. So yes, we will again start a discussion thread on this. Okay. But one thing is sure that Python does not allow multiple inits, so you can have at most one underscore init in your class. Okay. So a class variable like next ID belongs to a class. Okay, so Anirudh has some comment or question. Let me just check it. So when we instantiate object, it gets called. Right, so underscore init gets called whenever we instantiate an object. But in this case, because bank person is anyway inheriting from person class, So is it possible that we don't have to explicitly call the underscore in it? So this is the question that I will answer after the class. Okay, but you can also try it. Just put a print statement inside the constructor and then you can confirm whether it gets called or not. Okay, so right, any other question? Okay, so class variable, as we discussed, any change to a class variable is visible to all, and any of the object can change this in this variable. Okay, so it's very important that you maintain some kind of discipline when you are using class variables. Okay. So at this point we will move to Acads website to solve quick quiz number 37. Okay, so let's discuss the answer. So in this case, we can see that there is a tricks list which is a class variable. Okay, and in the init call, I am just creating name for a dog, and each dog has its own set of tricks. It can learn different tricks. So for different dogs, I would like to append different tricks. However, even though I am calling tricks with self.tricks, it still refers to the class variable tricks. Okay, so just by saying self.tricks, it does not create a new tricks list within this class dog, and therefore whether I add a trick to Fido or whether I add a trick to Buddy, every dog gets the same set of tricks. So in this case, because of the mistaken use of tricks variable, I am getting 2 tricks for every dog, rollover as well as play dead. Now this is once again a mistake. I should have initialized tricks inside init as a empty self.tricks equal to empty list. Okay, so any questions about this? In the second case, there were certain things which I did not discuss in class, but I think people should be able to guess it. So first thing, Python supports public and private variables inside a class, and we have seen that this is not true. We have been discussing it. So Python, everything is the protection is by convention. So when you use underscore underscore, these things are treated as special, and when you have a single underscore, such variables are also treated. I mean, other programmers know that these are private, so we should not touch them. Okay, so but it's all about convention. You can always override these things. Okay, so the second point is about convention. By convention, variable names starting with 2 underscores are considered special. That is true. We have seen that. Okay, but it does not again stop you from creating your own underscore variables. So is instance obj int. So Python gives you a function is instance to check whether a particular object is of a particular type or not. Okay, or if it is derived from a particular type or not. So if I have a class int and later I decide to derive a class fraction from int, then is instance fraction comma int will be true. In our case, is instance bank person comma or an object of type bank person comma person will also be true, because the class of that derived class of the object of type bank person is derived from person. Okay, so this is one way of figuring out certain properties of a given object when you just have a handle on the object, but you really don't know the type of it. Okay, and finally, it is possible to refer to current object in a class method using only the keyword self. So again, we discussed this. This is not true. You can call it whatever you want as long as it follows Python's naming convention. Any identifier can be used. But once again, I would strongly recommend not using anything other than self. Okay, not even this. So Python programmers are used to keyword self, or not really keyword, the variable self to access the current object. Okay, so any questions here? Okay, so Sridhar wants me to go over initialization once again, initializing with underscore init. Okay, so as we see, let me take this dog example, which is a simpler one. So remember that class can have two types of variables. One is a class variable, one is object variable. Okay. Now when we do underscore init underscore, okay, and again I'm going to use self as if it is the keyword. So whenever you refer or whenever you assign to a variable using self dot variable name, this creates a new variable within the object. Okay. Now just like global variables, if are very similar to global variables, if the same name exists in the class, then the name is not created. Okay. So in this case, if I create a name variable at class scope, that is seen earlier and therefore it will not be created again. But otherwise, whenever I say self.name equal to name, it will create an object specific member called name and add it to the object of the type class. Okay. Now what is different? Different is if we already create a variable before we refer to it using self.name. In this case, the class variable is created which is shared among all instances of the class. Okay. So any object you create for class dog in this case, it will get same reference to tricks variable. Okay. Now if I modify tricks from one object, the same modification will be reflected in all other objects of type dog. So later when I run this program, first thing I do is create a dog with name Fido. So the moment the class object of class dog is created, Fido is passed as name and therefore the name of the dog is set to Fido. Okay, so if I print d.name, it will print Fido. Then I create another dog with name Buddy. Okay. Now when I add a trick roll over to Fido, even though my intention was to add it to a local variable to the object self.tricks or local member, I wanted to append the given trick to it. Unfortunately, this class already had a variable or class variable named tricks and therefore rollover got added to that list tricks. Okay. And in a way, inadvertently, I have also modified the class or the object corresponding to dog Buddy. Okay, so Buddy also now knows the trick of rolling over, even though probably I taught it just to Fido. Okay, and similarly, when I added play that trick to Buddy, inadvertently Fido also learned the same trick. Okay, so that's how class variables work. Any change to class variable gets reflected into all the objects of that class. So when I try to print tricks that Fido knows, it actually prints both rollover as well as play dead. Okay. So any other question, Sridhar? So Anirudh has some question above. Let me just check that. So to add trick for each dog, can we add self.trick equal to empty list in append trick method? Add trick method, I believe. Okay. So once again, since this is a list, you will have to first initialize it with empty list in init method. And after that in add trick, you can do self.trick. So let me just show you in the Emacs window. So the correct code will be, instead of tricks here, I should create an empty list of tricks in the initialization routine and then add, and then this code will work as expected. Okay. If it was some other, so suppose dog can learn only one trick, you do not want to really keep track of multiple tricks. In that case, just doing self.trick equal to trick would have worked. Okay. So now this will create a single trick. Sorry, no semicolon. Okay. This will create a single trick and add it to the current dog. Okay. However, as I keep saying, this is a bad practice. All instance variable, you should create them in init itself, and even if you are going to initialize the trick later, it's always a good idea to initialize it with none in the init function itself, so that you or the reader of this code knows that these are going to be the object specific attributes for this particular class. Okay, so once again let me go over this. Adding self.trick equal to none in init is not necessary, but it is, I will suggest that you do it every time. Okay, so let's look at the next. Okay, so let's look at the next class. So from bank person we are deriving customer as well as employee. So let's look at what customer class does. Okay. So a customer is a bank person, and therefore we are creating within init class, we are creating bank person, initializing bank person. Now in this case I don't have to go back to person because bank person initialization will call person's constructor. Okay, so customer is derived from bank person, and I am defining a person, or my bank is defining a customer who is a person or bank person holding a bank account. And the accounts can be of two types, either savings or fixed deposits. So now you can see that in this case both savings as well as FDs are instance specific. Okay, I would not like to share my savings or FDs with you guys. Okay, so I have to create it person specific or customer specific, and then there are certain methods. Okay, now in this case I am also adding a function to clone the argument. And once again, this is just to say that this is a naming convention. So I would not like others to know how I am going to clone and sort this particular customer. Okay, I just want this function to be used internal to the customer class. Okay, and why do I need this? So somewhere later I am printing all the customers. Yes, so so I am getting all the savings account in sorted order. Okay, so you can see that clone and sort method, it will clone the current, it will clone the list of accounts, it will sort it and return it. It is not going to modify the existing list. Okay, and when I ask for all the savings account of a person, I am going to return the sorted list. Okay, this helps me because I am creating a copy and then returning it. So anyone who gets this list, he or she will get it in sorted order. But if this person tries to play mischief and changes the information, it is not going to get reflected in the customer itself, because what I am returning is a clone. Okay, not the original list. And similarly for FDs. Okay. So any questions up to this? So once again, the details of this code is problem specific, it is the requirement specific, but there are certain good practices that I am trying to convey here. Okay, so both clone and sort, and later we will see a generator version that Prasanna will cover. So clone and sort is going to create a clone of the account information and return that clone. It is not going to return the actual account, because then people other objects or other functions can change the account information, which I really don't want. Okay. In particular, I should really create these savings and FDs also as private variable. By convention, I should have these names starting with underscore, because I do not want to share this information outside the class. Okay. All right. So let's look at certain things. And now I have a customer class. Okay. Let's see what kind of test I can do. So once again, I am creating certain customers. So a person named Amey Karkare and then a customer named Amey Karkare and some other customers. Okay. And once again, I am trying to do some validity checking. And finally, I add certain accounts to each of the customers, and then I add some fixed deposits. Okay. And finally, I am getting a list of these customers and then printing them. Okay. So let me do this. So for every customer, I plan to print his or her saving account as well as fixed deposit accounts. Now you can see the use of type command. Okay. I remember in one of the classes someone asked, is there a use of type beyond using it on Python shell and figuring out types of a expression or a variable? Now here is one use of types in programming. I have a list of persons with me. Some of them are bank customers, some of them are not. So for every bank customer, I want to print the details of his or her account. Okay. So in this case, I can use this type function. So if type of P is customer, only then I am going to print the account. So in this case, if you remember, P1 is not a customer. P1 is a simple person. P2, P3, P4 are customers. Okay. So let's run this testing code. Let me just keep it. Okay. So let's test the customer. So you can see that even though my list contains P1, P2, P3, P4, I am only printing information about P2, P3 and P4. Okay, P1 is ignored because of this type checking. So P2 has certain accounts, P3 has certain accounts and so on. And you can see that accounts are printed in sorted order. That is because when we get these accounts, we are getting a clone which is sorted. Okay. So any questions up to this point? Okay. So let's come back to our discussion. So from customer also I would like to have a special class of customer which are premium customers. Okay, so normal customers are some customers which maintain minimum balance, may or may not have FD, and then premium customers, typically banks will have certain threshold. If you have more money than that threshold, you will be considered premium for the bank, premium customer for the bank. So let's look at these two classes. So normal customers do not have anything extra over customer. Okay. However, having a separate class allows us to manage things in case things in future. Okay. So in this case, my normal customer has no special attribute on top of customer, but still I have created it because maybe in future I might want to have another attribute to normal customer, probably Aadhaar card number or some kind of identity number. Okay, special identity number. Premium customer. So in my case, premium customers, I'm not saying how they are defined, but premium customer has another attribute called relationship manager. So I am going to add couple of more things to simple customer. One is the internal the member relational manager and a function which gives me back the name of the relation manager. Okay. Now relation manager itself could be just a string, or it could be a person, or it could be a bank person. It depends how you want to implement it. So I see that Anirudh has a question. So Anirudh is asking, private methods cannot be accessed by objects variables. So once again, Python does not distinguish between private method and public method. So do you mean class objects, class members? Anirudh, so let me unmute you and then you can ask. I think that way we can have a better discussion. Okay, please unmute yourself and then you can ask the question. Hello? Anirudh, can you speak? You are still on mute.
You hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah, no, my question was like you have the private method with underscore, right? So to
Okay.
access those variables inside the private method, you cannot access it from outside, right?
No, okay. So once again, Python does not enforce such restriction. It's just convention. Okay.
Oh.
So the moment you put underscore, other programmers know that this is a method which the person who created this class wants to remain private. Okay. But Python as such does not have any such enforcing. So ideal programmer should not use it outside class objects. Okay, you should only use it inside the objects or inside the class of that particular. I mean, within the class body only you should use it. Okay, and you can call it on the objects of that particular class, but it's kind of should not be used in general.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so Python in that sense is really much less secure in type way compared to C++ or Java. Okay.
So it won't be restriction. So that means it's not like so it's not a secure thing to do, right? I mean, like accessing account IDs or
no.
Okay.
No. So Python, if you really want to write secure programming, secure programs or obfuscated programs, so Python is not the right language for you then. Okay. Most of the time people can reconstruct your program even from the bytecode. So if you are worried about IP or if you are worried about others using internals of your code, I am sure Python will not be the right language for you. Okay, it's mostly used for user interaction. Okay, and places where the secrecy or security is not that important. Okay. Right, so here is the premium manager, and finally I have an employee class. Once again, employee don't have anything special on top of bank person, so we are not adding anything here. Okay, so let's look at the testing of customer class or sub customer class. So in this case, I am creating certain customers, some of which are premium, some of which are normal, and then again some kind of testing followed by some other operation. So in this case, depending on whether I have a normal customer or a premium customer, okay, I am trying to print the name of relation manager. Okay, so in this case I am using two different functions. So first note that I have replaced the comparison type P equal to customer by P dot is customer. Okay, and somewhere else I am using type P. Okay, so what is this is customer method? So this is also a very interesting method. Let's go back to bank person class. So remember, bank person has customer as its subclass. Okay. Now within bank person, I have added a function called is customer. Okay. So I know that bank person can be employee or it can be customer or it can be some other things as well. But I am interested in knowing whether a person is customer or not, and therefore I am adding is customer inside the bank person class. So now one way of implementing this is customer could be I return true within customer class subclass and return false within bank employee subclass. Okay, so customer returns true, employee returns false, and so on. But let's say we add more subclasses of bank person, then we will have to put this definition. Otherwise we will get an exception saying is customer not defined for certain subclasses of bank person. Now Python allows you to have a different kind of way. So I can define a function is customer, which for a given bank person object will return true only if the current object is really an instance of customer class. Okay, so this is the use of is instance that we discussed in quiz. So suppose I get an object within is customer function. Python can test whether that particular object is is derived from customer class or not. Okay, and this way in bank person class itself I am able to say whether a particular object is a customer or not. I don't have to worry about adding a new, means remembering to add this function in a new derived class of bank person. So this is how is instance can be used. Okay, in fact I can even use is instance in the last code as well. So I can also call is instance here. So if P is an instance of premium customer, then only I will print relationship manager, otherwise I will not print the name of relationship manager. Okay, so now you can see that using means organizing your code in terms of classes and subclasses, it keeps your code clean because you are concentrating on a specific attributes of a particular class or a subclass. Okay, the code remains small, so the chances of bugs are fewer, and at the same time Python gives you way of figuring out which subclass you are really talking about. Okay, so let's look at run this particular code once again. So now you can see that P. Mukherjee is a premium customer. So let me just go. Yeah. Okay, so for him I print some manager name. Then Amey Karkare is not a premium customer, but Vijay is. So you get a manager 2 here. Okay. So this way types allow us to distinguish between objects which are part of certain class and which are not part of certain other class. Okay, even if the classes are related by inheritance. Okay. So this is all about our object-oriented programming in Python. So as we saw that Python is not really secure in the sense it does not enforce certain programming practices. Okay, so you have to write it. So you have to follow certain discipline. Okay, so writing a bad Python program is very easy, but you have to avoid that temptation. Always make sure that you write small functions, small classes, and design well before you start coding your program. Okay, that way you will get a program which is much smaller in size. We saw that during the discussion in a tutorial also. So just by looking at your code, you could figure out many ways of abstracting out certain functions. Okay, so let me just check if there are any questions. So yes, Sridhar had a question that he retracted. So can we derive a method from superclass in subclass? Yes, of course. So superclass's behavior will be inherited in subclass, but then you can always overwrite. Okay. So this was about object-oriented programming. So what we saw that object-oriented programming allows us to encapsulate things. So we create a kind of wrapper which glues together data attributes and methods that operate on data attribute. And in general, we do not want people outside the class or this object to modify data attribute directly. Okay, we would like them to use methods which are exposed to outside world. And then in particular, we get this information hiding. Okay, the users of the class must not use things which they are not supposed to. Okay, in case of Python, it's again because of programming discipline. Certain other languages enforce this restriction, enforce hiding. But in case of Python, you have to write your program such that you do not rely on internals, but just use the interfaces which programmer has said are public. Okay, this way you will depend on what is implemented by the class and not depend on how it is implemented. So again, one example could be, today I am going to return you a sorted list of customer accounts. Now you should not worry about whether I store these accounts as a set or a dictionary or a linked list or whatever. Okay, you should only worry about that get account list will give you all the accounts in sorted order. Okay. So Anirudh is asking a question. In my use case, say I am connecting to a REST API and I need to pass username and password. In this case, how can I hide password? Okay. So Anirudh, in this case, in fact, in any case, if you have to pass a password, it's always a good idea to hash it with, you have to make it, you have to use public key and private key methods to encrypt your password and then only send encrypted thing. The server should be able to check it against its database. Okay. So passing a password in clear text in any way is not secure. Okay, so this is not just a Python problem, this will be problem with any language that you use. So you will have to find a way to encrypt your password at client end and either decrypt it at server end or use some way of making sure that the encrypted string is the correct string. Okay. So again, this is the application specific thing, we can take it offline. I will pass you some literature on that. Okay. All right. So any questions on object-oriented programming? So even though the term is big, people use it very often, people are very sort of particular about saying that they want object-oriented design. In reality, it's about creating your program in a way that you expose minimal things to the outside world. Most of your things remain secure within a wrapper of the class. Okay. And others are not supposed to access it. Okay. So this closes our discussion on classes. So I would like to finish the discussion of iterators if you have few minutes. Okay, so it will take about 10 to 15 minutes. So that way we will be closing on all the features of Python. Okay. So let me just continue with this for a few more minutes. We have already passed our regular time, 15 minutes past that. And this is an independent topic, so if someone has some important work, they can leave and then they can watch the video. Okay. All right. So we have seen iterators in class. Okay. In particular, when you have typical usage is for loop, so you have certain sequence. And then you just say that for elements in that sequence, do something on the element. Okay. So here are certain examples. So we have a list or a tuple or dictionary or string and whatever, or even a file. Okay. We have been doing this for element in list, print each element. Okay. Now how does this work in Python? How is it that you are able to iterate over many different types of things using a uniform interface? Okay, so once again, the object-oriented nature or the class hierarchy of Python helps us here. So the way iterators are implemented is this. So whenever you have a for statement, so for statement is what we call a syntax sugar. Okay, it really does not have any machine equivalent or a lower level equivalent in the system. The for statement gets translated into some other function calls. So the very first function call is the iter function. So once again, this is a Python specific function. Okay, it's not a keyword, you can overwrite it, but it's again a bad idea. So to overwrite it. So for statement, first thing it does is it will call iter on the container object. Okay, so whether it is a list or a tuple or whatever, first thing what happens is an iter method is called on the object. The behavior of iter function is to return an iterator object, and this iterator object should define the method next. Okay, so that is the only requirement on whatever is returned from the iter object. So whatever it returns, it should contain a method called next. And now the behavior of next method is to access elements in the container one at a time. So when you have a list, next element will access the elements in list sequentially. If you have a tuple, it will access elements sequentially and so on. Okay. So next can be implemented differently for a list or for a tuple and a dictionary and so on. Okay. So now next keeps on accessing elements, but sometime or other it will reach the last element, after which If you try to call next once more, next will raise stop iteration exception. Okay, so see, we have done all this. We have done class functions, we have done classes, and we have done exceptions. So this is what goes in behind the scene. So iterate for loops, it will call iter first time, and then it will keep calling next function till next function returns an exception or raises an exception, at which point for loop terminates. Okay, so let's look at a concrete example. So I have a string s. I am calling an iterator function on s and storing that in the object it. Okay. Now whenever I do next on this object it, it will give me the next element in the string s. So it itself is an object. So next of it gives me first character, which is a, then b, then c, and now I am done. So I have seen all the elements in string s. Now if I call next, I get an exception. Okay. So really, if you don't have a for loop, you can keep doing this thing manually. Okay. So but what you can do is really use Python's feature to create your own iterator. So if you have a class, you define this special name underscore underscore itr underscore underscore. So in the slide it looks like a long single underscore, but it is really double underscore iterator method. So in a class you define underscore iter method, and this method should return an object with the underscore next method. Okay. If the class defines underscore next method itself, then it's even easier. You can just return self. And here is the example. I have a class reverse which iterates over a sequence in reverse direction. So typical iterators we have seen go in forward direction, but now we want an iterator which goes in reverse direction. So this particular class takes a data and does something to remember last position. Okay, and it has this iter method and the next method. So since class defines next method, iter method is really simple. I can just return self. What do I do in next? So as you can see, in next I want to iterate in reverse direction. So I will start from the last element and go towards the first element. So self.index will be decremented and the data at this position will be returned, provided self.index is non-zero. If self.index is 0, which means I have consumed all the data, so I will raise stop iteration. Okay, and now I can create this reverse object, which is really an iterator object, and I can use for loop on the reverse object. Okay, so in this case you can see that characters are printed in reverse, and if you are interested, you can even create the effect of for loop without using for loop, using while. Okay, so I am using r equal to reverse spam, then char is iter r, and then I am using a while, infinite while loop to go over elements in the iterator and finally breaking whenever I get an exception. Okay, so any for loop can be rewritten in terms of an infinite while loop which breaks whenever you get an exception. So if there are any question, please raise your hand or send a chat. Oh, Sridhar has a question, so let me just open it. So let's just one moment. Sorry, Sridhar. Okay, so can you unmute yourself and then speak? So I missed your yeah.
Not a problem. We said that for loop uses init and iter, and then which in turn uses init the next function, right?
Right.
But does it, like, how does it know in this example that you gave it should call underscore init? I mean, like,
okay, so look at this. So I am creating an object reverse. Okay, REV. So let me just highlight it. Okay, so for loop is not calling the init. Init gets called when I created the object. Okay, for is just calling iter on rev. Okay, so say same thing here. So for loop will first call iter on whatever object you call for on. So if it was list 1, 2, 3, okay, it will just call list 1, 2, 3 dot iter. It is not going to call init of the list. Is it clear? So look at the example on the left once again. I am calling reverse class before I call the for loop. Okay, so init is called by the instantiation of reverse class.
Okay, but
now on
you
reverse
say,
object I am calling the iter.
okay, here we have defined underscore iter underscore for like which returns the self object, right? In reverse.
Yes. Yes.
But this is not is what is being called by when you call for loop. It is calling iter, which is different than underscore iter.
Oh, okay. So once again, just like less than calls underscore underscore lt plus calls underscore underscore add, the function iter calls underscore underscore iter. Okay, so that's the Python convention. So internally, if a class, so for example, whenever you call iter on an object R, Python will rewrite this. So let me just do that. Internally to R dot underscore underscore iter.
Oh.
Okay, so this is, yeah, so this takes some time to get used to. Okay, so many functions they have inside the class. When you want to implement it or when you want to override it, you have to use underscore underscore version of them. So same thing is true for all the operators like less than, greater than, equal to, the str function which gets implemented by underscore underscore str, okay, and so on. And there is a long list of such functions. Okay. So is it clear now? Okay. And if it is not, then we have a quiz coming soon, and you should try to answer that. Quiz number 38. Please let me just see if I have any other slide. This should be hopefully be the last slide. Yeah. So please go to quiz number 38 and try answering it. Okay. So sorry for having such a long class, but I feel towards the end it becomes really distracting if we have too many breaks, and that's why I kept fewer number of quizzes. Okay, so the question is, what if we override iter? So once again, note the, let me come back to, others can start working on the quiz. Let me discuss this. If you are clear, okay. So note that iter is not really member of R or whatever class we are talking about. Okay, so if you have a method called iter inside the class reverse, okay, then it is not going to override underscore underscore iter. Okay, so it will have its own different behavior, in which case your for loop might break on that particular sequence. Okay, so even here, if I don't return self in underscore underscore iter, you will get an exception saying that the object returned does not implement next method. Okay, so please try that, return some integer from underscore iter, or write your own definition of iter without underscores and so on. Try these things and you will see that Python does some kind of runtime checking. During execution, it will give you an error. Okay. So yeah, let's look at the quiz and then we will stop for the day unless anyone has any question. So this is a bit larger program. So please raise your hand once you are done so that I can discuss this. Okay, so let's just discuss it. I will not disclose the answers. You can try it later. So in this case, you can see I have created two classes. One of the class implements iter routine, but next routine is defined in the next in another class. Okay, and this is allowed in Python because only restriction for iterators to work is that the class which is returned by, or the object which is returned by iter function should implement next function. Okay, so now when I have an object zigzag, the moment I say for x in this zigzag object, I get hold of the class which is returned by iter function, which means I really get an instance of foobar class. Okay, and then I keep calling next on the foobar class. Okay, so internally I am doing something random, but this is what is the most important thing, that within for loop you will keep calling next of foobar object, and in every iteration it will do some operation, and when it feels that all the iterations are done, it will raise a stop iteration exception, at which point for loop will terminate and you will have all the data with you. Okay, so I think the body should be clear to all. What we are really doing is just picking one element from start and one element from end, and creating a new list. So it's really kind of a zigzag traversal over the string, but finally we get a list of that string. Okay, so I request everyone to solve this, and if there are any questions, post it or ask them in the next class. And most probably next class will be our last class of this session. Okay, thank you.